This is the CineSnob Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 363 of the CineSnob Podcast. I am Cody Villafana.
And I'm Kiko Martinez.
And we want to say welcome to a new audience today. As of today and moving forward, our podcast will be in association with the San Antonio Current, and you'll be able to find our podcast over there. So hopefully we have some new audience, and we can tell them a little bit about us and what we do here. So Kiko and I are film critics based here in San Antonio, and both of us have a history, you a little bit more than me, with the Current. You've been contributing to the Current for how long at this point?
Yeah, almost 25 years. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been contributing. I most of the time I do film articles and interviews and reviews, but over the past 25 years, I've delved into other topics as well. But I know you also wrote for the Current for a few years during your career. How long ago was that?
Oh man, that was probably like close to 10 years ago at this point, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I wrote TV reviews for the Current.
That's right. Yeah,
for several years. But yeah, independently, you've had CineSnob.net for
I think
20 years?
Since 2007. 2007. So yeah, it's coming up to 20-year anniversary. You're gonna buy me something.
Yeah, and I've been there since 2016. So I've been there for 10 years.
10 years.
Well, actually, was it before that? I can't remember. I think it was that. That sounds right. Right?
Yeah. I'm not sure where we kind of changed from writing articles or writing reviews to actually getting on the podcast and making that exclusive. But
yeah. So I actually do remember. So I've been there for 15 years. Started in 2011, and then this podcast has been around for like 11 years. And so what you can expect from the podcast here is weekly reviews of movies that are coming out that week, both theatrically and on VOD for rental, or streaming as well. And we try to mix it up as much as possible and include movies that are sort of like big studio releases, and then always try to make a point to try to cover independent films, smaller movies, foreign films, documentaries, stuff that maybe needs a little bit more light shined on it, and hopefully we'll be able to tell you whether it's worth seeking out or not.
Yeah, and then over the past 20 years, just remember that the studios have we get to see things usually before they hit theaters, but over the past 20 years, it's been less and less in terms of getting actual able to get that kind of see things beforehand. So it's changed a lot over the past couple of decades. We get to see less things, but since the industry's changed so much, we try to still take those opportunities that the studios give us, but also we have to kind of do the legwork ourselves and get into the theater as well. So.
Yeah, and because of that, you can expect our episodes to probably drop on like Monday mornings at the Current, because they don't show us stuff in advance, so we have to take up our weekend and go see it on our own. Yeah. So in addition to that, CineSnob.net, if you have not been there before, has a number of different features to it. Kiko has a library of interviews with people both in front of and behind the camera, in terms of up-to-date releases and actors, filmmakers, and everyone in between. In addition, if you're listening to this and don't want to have certain movies spoiled, although we typically don't spoil any movies on our reviews, we'll let you know well in advance if we're going to talk spoilers. But if you would rather just hear one review at a time, you can go to CineSnob.net, click on the movie. We've got them clipped into individual things, so you can find that there. We're also have a YouTube channel where we keep the podcast, the interviews that you could find on YouTube. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, Pocket Cast, wherever you have it, we've got it. So, any other intro bits for you, Kiko?
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to open up this new chapter, get some more San Antonio people involved. I always say it's good to have a film critic that you follow. You don't have to always agree with them, but you can't watch all the movies that come out in 1 week, so you might as well find somebody that you have maybe like the same movie brain as.
Yeah.
And maybe allow them to like, hey, give you a recommendation for that week. We can't cover all the movies that come out in 1 week anymore, so I couldn't even imagine if somebody tried that's not in the industry. So.
Yeah, and I think like the thing is like, I think after a while you'll probably get to know our taste and know whether or not you can trust us. So we'll see about that. But and then the other thing too is you can also expect coverage from local festivals. So, for example, I will be covering Fantastic Fest in Austin in about a month's time. So you can expect previews, reviews, thoughts from that experience. We'll probably have something from Austin Film Festival later this year. We typically cover South by Southwest. We cover Sundance Film Festival. All of that you can expect to hear. And thanks for listening. And I think we can go ahead and get started. We've got a few movies to cover today, so let's get underway.
Here are this week's reviews.
First up this week, we have Tony. Tony is a biopic about Anthony Bourdain, chef kind of turned author and documentary maker. And in the movie is, the log line is, 19-year-old Anthony Bourdain stumbles into the chaotic world of a restaurant kitchen, setting off a summer that shapes the course of his life. So this is not your biopic where it's covering, the entire life of Anthony Bourdain. This is covering one particular summer that was instrumental for developing his, personality, love of food, the course of his life. And it is directed by Matt Johnson, who is having I do love Matt Johnson. He's having a great year. Turned a corner in his career with Blackberry several years ago, and then put out one of my favorite films of the year so far in Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie. And this is certainly his most sort of like accessible, straightforward movie that he's made in his career so far. I think, one important thing I think to know about the movie is that I have not read Kitchen Confidential, the sort of book that kind of propelled Bourdain's post-chef career. Right. But my understanding is that this movie is more of like an imagining of what Anthony Bourdain's experience was like, rather than being this sort of like really direct, close to the truth kind of thing, where there's some like narrative liberties that are taking. A lot of the characters in the movies are more like amalgamations of people who he encountered throughout his life, rather than being, again, true to one specific person. So in that sense, the movie sort of reads, to me at least, like more like a coming of age movie that takes place with the backdrop of food than it is more so like, again, like a strict biopic of Anthony Bourdain, or this sort of like like movie that is like totally rooted in it's food, in the food culture kind of thing, which I'll kind of circle back to a little bit later when I talk about other pieces of the movie. So I mean, I feel like you could almost drop this. Almost doesn't even have to be about Anthony Bourdain. It could just be about a kid who stumbles into a kitchen and things like that. So, it's more about this coming of age movie about a kid who is kind of like making a bunch of mistakes and kind of navigating his way through that. So the Anthony Bourdain in the movie is played by Dominic Sessa, who is sort of becoming very good at playing just sort of like a sort of like sarcastic little shit in period movies, where he kind of burst onto the scene in The Holdovers a few years back, and very much sort of held his own against Paul Giamatti in a movie that is amazing. And
I would say that he held his own, but I think he was overshadowed by Divine Joy Randolph and Paul Giamatti, even though he's great. But those performances were
great performances all around, and I think he particularly holds his own because I think that's the first thing he's ever done, right? And he does not play as a sort of first time actor in that movie, right. And so he plays Anthony Bourdain, who essentially kind of like lies his way into a number of different situations, both to sort of follow a love interest and then to work his way into a kitchen to, have a place to live after something in his life goes wrong. I think the performances in the movie are really great across the board. Sessa is great as this sort of like, very sarcastic, character who, kind of can't help himself, but to kind of, like I said, lie his way into all of these different situations. There's a great performance from Leo Woodall, who kind of plays another person in the kitchen who kind of takes Tony under his wing and ends up being maybe not the best influence in the world. And the whole thing is sort of anchored by another great performance in Antonio Banderas, who plays the chef in the kitchen that he ends up working in. And there's just some fun like quirks to that character that I think make it really interesting. The idea that he gets super mad if, someone uses the Lord's name in vain and wakes him up every day with a
bucket of water
to the face. Yeah. And like I said, I think the movie works really well as like a coming of age story, and kind of, it's kind of set in Cape Cod and looks really nice, and in terms of like the setting of everything, the waterfront kind of look of it all. I think that it captures sort of like the fun of sort of like a ball busting kitchen, and that's helped by comedian Stavros Halkias, who plays one of the chefs who's pretty funny in the movie.
Hey, he's been in a couple of things. I've enjoyed his the last couple of things that I saw him in. So
yeah, he was in Begonia.
That's right. Yeah.
Recently, and I think he was cast in the new Judd Apatow movie that's coming out in a pretty big role. So it's cool to see him. I like Stavi. I think he's a really
would you
funny
consider
guy.
him a character actor? He's
Yeah,
like the epitome of a character.
He is the epitome of a character actor. But yeah, and then and it's also fun to see, like, and I don't know if you probably didn't pick up on this, but like so Nirvana the band, the show, the movie is him and Jay McCarroll, and Jay did the music for this movie, and so he's like a real collaborator. He did the music to Blackberry. He's kind of his musical collaborator.
Yeah, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a cool little kind of Easter egg of a thing. I would say that like I said, the movie does not again feel like this full Anthony Bourdain biopic, and I think the one thing that I find that's moving, I mean, I think the script is really solid. Again, I like this sort of like sarcastic, cutting, witty lines. There's some great scenes where like he's trying to impress Emilia Jones and and talking to her in a bar and there's some like really well written sort of moments of conflict within the movie. I think that's where the movie sort of is at its best, is when there's conflict between him and Antonio Banderas, him and Emilia Jones, him and his parents to some degree. I think that's where the movie kind of shines. I think the one thing that I feel is missing from this movie is I never really got the connection between this experience being something that sort of changed the course of his life into wanting to go into food. Like, I don't really get that passion for food in cooking coming out of it. A lot of the things that he's doing in the kitchen is like to try to impress a girl, or to have a place to live, to try to get money and kind of scam
to not have to wash dishes, or
Yeah, exactly. And so when you have movies that are kind of set in the food world, the thing I can just think of quickly is like Chef. There's like a passion for food there. There's a passion for cooking. There's a passion for serving. There's like the food porny shots.
And they get into it. They get into the cooking. They show you how to make a Cuban sandwich, and and
totally that's the thing that's kind of missing from Tony, where there is a little bit of like learning how to cook a meal, but like it's never something that it feels like the character of Tony is like super like passionate about. And again, in a way that this movie is supposed to depict this period of time where like it changed his course of life to wanting to be a writer, to wanting to be a chef. Yeah. And I think that is the piece that kind of holds it back a little bit. Because I don't
even think he needed to be passionate about it. I just wanted to see more of it,
Yeah.
Maybe he grew into the passion later on, that's the second chapter of his life, but I just wanted to see more of the cooking, more of the food, more of that experience.
Because there's really not a lot of those like food porny shots of stuff. It's really just like shucking oysters and then like one scene of like making lobster thermidor, and like that's about the extent of it.
Chucking oysters is a little bit porny. I don't know. But,
yeah, it is an aphrodisiac, as they say multiple times.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I wish they would have leaned more into the food piece, because then I think that it becomes something more than just sort of like a coming of age movie with like this restaurant stuff happening in the background, especially when you're talking about, Anthony Bourdain, a person so synonymous with food and cooking and passion about those things. So it's a really solid coming of age movie. It has great performances. I think Dominic Sessa is a star. I think he's a really, really good actor. And I think for a Matt Johnson movie, it's really grounded. He wrote the script too, and it's a grounded script from him too, where it's got moments of levity, it's got moments of seriousness. It's well executed. I just wish there was a little bit more on the food side of things. But Kiko, why don't you go ahead and give your thoughts on Tony?
For people that are just tuning in for the first time, they're going to realize that sometimes you and I agree on things completely.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's what I have. All my notes are written that way. I mean, the movie's great. I loved so many aspects of it, but it's that food gripe that I have. I love the kitchen scenes and the atmosphere and the culinary world, but I wish I had gone deeper into the actual food itself. So, that's a complaint I frequently have with movies built around a specific, like, profession or industry. Like, if you're going to bring me into that world, teach me something about it or show me something about it. And I think that's what was missing here too. I was waiting for that big food porn scene where Antonio Banderas is like showing him how to create this amazing dish, and he doesn't have to love it, but he's learning about it, and you're seeing it, in real time happening. So I wish that had happened as well. So, the film reminded me of two very different Jesse Eisenberg movies, and we're talking about how this is both a biopic and a coming of age story. So for the coming of age story, it reminded me of the 2009 comedy Adventureland, where Eisenberg plays an aspiring writer stuck in the amusement park world. And then it reminded me too, from the biopic side, is Social Network, which arrived a year later, I think, and it kind of was more of a character study about a young Mark Zuckerberg. So I think Tony, for me, fell somewhere between those two films. It was a character study, even though it doesn't reach those depths of like the best biopics that I've seen in the last 20 years, which would be something like The Social Network or Moneyball, if you want to call it a biopic, or Oppenheimer. So that would be like top tier for me. Tony's like a step down from that for me, but I still, what impressed me the most, and we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, or what you said, was that this story is about the late Anthony Bourdain, but ultimately it doesn't have to be about Anthony Bourdain. So I think like the fact that the celebrity is stripped away and it leaves behind all this human emotion at the core of what it wants to be. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think they even say Anthony Bourdain until the very end, which was pretty interesting to me. So I thought that this film was like universal. It felt like a universal movie. You don't need to know anything about Bourdain to understand what he's going through, and I think that was something great that Matt Johnson did, and I think he had like 2 writing collaborators on this, but it's a movie about Bourdain, but it doesn't get too deep into like, oh, he's this famous person, right? He just treats him like rather than treating him like a cultural icon, like he's not worshipped or anything. Like the film is interested in the person that's underneath all of that. So the performances, Dominic Sessa, just he has an undeniably great presence here. I thought that the supporting cast was equally as great. Antonio Banderas, Emily Jones, who I've loved since Coda, Leo Woodall, and then Stavros was great. So I think that everybody knows their assignment and nobody's trying to steal the movie. Everybody kind of just elevates it. And then of course, my little gripe was about the food, but I think everything still works in that. And I think the film still works, even though we're missing that little part of it. So, this is a biopic that makes you care about the person before reminding you who the person is. So I think that's a pretty good combination.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and get into final thoughts and grades. And yeah, I mean, for me, it's a film that is a coming of age movie first and foremost. And I think as a coming of age movie, it is successful. And I think, especially looking at, the arc of this of this character who, again, starts off as a little shit and ends up, at the very least at the end of the day, kind of like doing the right thing after. And so often in these movies, like either that journey doesn't feel earned, or maybe they don't change or go on a journey. In this one, I felt like the journey makes sense. I think Bourdain's passion for food is the one thing that doesn't come across, especially, like I said, in a movie that is supposed to be this like very pivotal summer for him that sort of, again, like changes the course. I mean, you look at the way that the movie ends and you're supposed to interpret that as like, okay, well, this had a profoundly deep effect on him.
Right.
And I don't know that that's either happening off screen or it's happening in very small ways and doses. It's not, super explicit. Great performances across the board. I think, the most mature movie that Matt Johnson has made in his career. I would continue to look forward to see what he does. And, to hear him talk about this movie, he kind of challenged himself to get away from all of his collaborators and make a movie a completely different way, because he knows that, he's going to have different opportunities in his career, and he doesn't want to lean on, doing the same thing over and over again. So he kind of challenged himself to make this movie, and I think he was successful in it. So I'm giving this a solid B. I think it's a really solid movie. I just wish that there was more of a culinary angle that kind of really connected.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing what Matt Johnson does after this. I think the film succeeds because it doesn't do what a lot of biopics or coming of age stories do, and that's turn the subject into like a saint. So it makes it an intimate story. It makes it a little bit messier. Like you said, he's a little shit at the beginning, but you still love him. And so him building out that fleshing out that character was really interesting. So and it also reminded us that behind every larger than life figure, there's just simply a person like Anthony Bourdain who has a lot of things that are going on in his life, and he's just trying to figure out where he belongs and what his passions are. So I am giving this a B+.
All right. So we'll go ahead and move into our next film, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. So this is a horror movie that is written and directed by Jane Schoenbrunn, who I think I've seen both of the movies that they've made, but prior to this, but I think I Saw the TV Glow was the one where it was a real sort of
breakout kind of for her, right?
A real breakout. And so the movie is basically the plot of the movie is there is this sort of like fictional Camp Miasma like film series, sort of, I think a play on sort of like these long-standing series like Nightmare on Elm Street, which I think Schoenbrunn like really watched a lot of when they were younger, and it's kind of like a dormant franchise, like as it's called in the movie, like zombie IP that has been kind of run into the ground a little bit. And this up-and-coming filmmaker played by Hannah Einbinder decides that she's going to reboot Camp Miasma, and in order to do that, she's interested in enlisting the star of the original Camp Miasma movie, played by Gillian Anderson, who has basically did that movie and then kind of disappeared from the public eye and hasn't acted since. And in this meeting that they have together, they explore the themes of the movie and a relationship between the two of them, and then ultimately it starts to turn into like a little bit of a fixation and kind of like an exploration of sex and identity and a bunch of other things that happen throughout the course of this. So I Saw the TV Glow. I didn't really love that movie, but it was very clearly like a very personal movie for Schoenbrunn, where they're incorporating pieces of their sort of gender experience, and there's clearly like it's coming from a place of reverence for like Buffy the Vampire Slayer was like the big sort of inspiration for that movie. And so there's obviously here there's pieces of like like I said, like the Nightmare on Elm Street pieces, but also, there's like a hint of this movie doesn't explore gender in the same way that I Saw the TV Glow does, but there's pieces of it. And I think sort of like talking about the sort of inherent like transphobia of like Sleepaway Camp, the first Sleepaway Camp movie, which I think is a reference point for that is, you know, present here. And it's also, I think, a bit easier to digest here, where, you know, the villain of the Camp Miasma movie is called Little Death, and so I think you can kind of imagine where this movie might be going in terms of its thematic elements. And so, I mean, I want to start by talking about the sort of technical aspects of the movie, because this is a movie that is like incredibly well made and well directed. Its visual style is really great, and I'm not sure if this was shot on film or it's some kind of effect that's going on,
right? Yeah.
But like there's a really interesting like film grain look to it, where it look I'm oh yeah, so yeah, it was shot on 35 millimeter. Definitely looks like it, and I think one of the rare cases, like I usually don't care a ton about a movie being shot on film, but I think it adds to the mix and adds to the visual style in this one a lot. You know, you may have seen online there's some behind the scenes footage of like them using like matte paintings to create things. So like the backgrounds of like the snowy forests and stuff like that are like paintings that they're kind of walking into, and it's got this great visual style to it. There's some really great sort of like blood and gore effects that happen throughout, and you know it's such a interesting take on the slasher movie, and you know Schoenbrunn also like makes a movie within the movie where we're watching maybe like, I don't know, on screen it's like 5 to 10 minutes ish of like the first Camp Miasma movie, to kind of like, you know, show you the context of everything, take you back to Gillian Anderson's performance from then, and that is really well done. It's like really funny. It's shot really interestingly. It's got that like sort of film look to it, and it also contains, I think, one of the best scenes of in any movie this year, which is there's
the
like
massacre scene.
Yeah, there's like a massacre kill scene that happens with this Counting Crows song that plays, and it's a great needle drop. It's a great, you know, kind of like one take kind of scene.
Yeah,
that shows
so creative. I mean, could this be the most creative slasher film ever made? I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, it's up there, and I think that's the type of horror that I think you and I are both really interested in, is like, can you tell an interesting, non-traditional story and place it in a horror? Or can you use your horror as a metaphor for something that's a little bit more deeper, a little bit more cerebral, exploring your themes, and more so than just sort of like trying to, you know, stack a body count of, you know, murders, right? And, you know, there's plenty of blood and gore in this movie, but you know, it's not, you know, the main focus of everything. The main focus is sort of an exploration of, like I said, you know, identity, sex, particularly I think people who have like hangups over sex or aren't able to be sort of like present and overthinking in their own heads and stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of funny moments that are built into the script. I like there's a great like pitch meeting scene that I think is really really well done. Like Sarah Sherman from SNL, you know, plays her the character's agent, and some funny parts. Performances are great. I think a lot of people are talking about Gillian Anderson here as being a really strong performer who plays, you know, again, this sort of reclusive actress, you know, with like a really deep Southern accent, and I think it's a great performance. Also, I imagine for you, Hannah Einbinder, you probably have not seen her before.
No, I know she came out and I read about her Hacks.
Yes.
Yeah. So she's pretty incredible. I hear in Hacks.
Yes, she is. She's great in Hacks, and she's you know, an Emmy winner for that show, and and she's actually the daughter of Lorraine Newman from SNL.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And she's really great in the movie as well. You know, she's so far in her career, she's kind of played a very like, she's kind of like typecast a little bit in playing kind of similar roles, but I don't think it's kind of like worn out its welcome quite yet, because I really like her as a performer. And she's also really good in the movie. So, you know, you have this like interesting take on, you know, sort of everything that I've mentioned so far. I think that and I'm gonna try to like tiptoe around this because I don't want to spoil too much about what goes on. But I think the intent of the movie that Schoenbrunn is trying to, explore is about the sort of like I said, like being in your own head or overthinking like the process of sex or love or relationships or whatever it might be. And you're talking about two characters who have had issues with like being present as part of that experience. And the sort of direction that it goes, kind of, I think, explores a little bit more about like disassociation as a means of participating in it. And I feel like that sends kind of like mixed messages. Again, this is just my read. Maybe I'm reading into it incorrectly.
Hey, can we put a footnote in here and tell everybody that you have a master's in psychology? So
yeah, that is true. So
I want to make sure, because every time we watch movies together, I always remember that part when you start going deep into some of these things that, and it's great. It's great. And when you were talking to me about this yesterday, you're opening up some themes that I hadn't even thought about. So
yeah. So I mean, and that is that we will give that disclaimer that is part of my educational history, and like I said, it involves like a certain level of disassociation. It almost feels like a trauma response that's going on, and I don't know that it's presented as such, right? I think maybe it starts off maybe a little bit about trauma, but then it kind of like feels like it's also unlocking something that I feel, like I said, sends mixed messages and maybe doesn't quite land on the notion that I think it's trying to project. And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit the more that I thought about it. And I've seen the movie twice, and I tried to, the second time I watched it, I tried to see if it hit me the same way, and it kind of did, right? So that's my real big hang up with it. Like I said, I think I don't know that message quite lands and sticks, but the sort of metaphorical piece, the idea of like the little death and the representation of little death and how it like, comes to light in the context of the movie, especially in like the last act, I think is really cool. It's a movie that is sort of unapologetic in its exploration of sex and intimacy, which I think is always refreshing to see. It's got great performances. It delivers on some really fun, bloody scenes. And I think it's the best movie I think that Jane Schoenbrunn has made. And I think they're starting to tap a little bit more into like more universal experiences rather than being so specific. And I think that makes it a little bit more relatable and enjoyable to watch. So I mean, I think this is just a really solid horror movie. So I'll go to you, Kiko.
Yeah, I'll try not to sound too self-indulgent when I say this, but it's movies like this that remind me why I love being a film critic, and the reason is because it's far from a perfect movie, but it takes a premise that we've seen in a million other dime a dozen slasher and gives it an actual like pulse, right? So when somebody asks me, "Oh, do you like slasher movies?" My answer is always the same as it is with any genre. Like, well, I like good slasher movies, right? And so, of course, those are few and far between when it comes to Hollywood. So, thankfully, Camp Miasma I thought it was clever. I thought it was funny, and I thought it was seductive. It gives that nice spin on the slasher movie that we've seen, 100 times, and it's 100 times more entertaining than anything that Nightmare on Elm Street sequel or reboot could ever be. So I think that the movie and the director know what the rules of the genre are. They know them well enough to break them and not be like arrogant about them, if that makes any sense. So it plays with these like familiar conventions, but it finds new ways to make viewers uncomfortable and then at the same time entertain. So it's at its best when it's not just asking like, oh, who's gonna die next? Let's check off the victims one by one. So that's what really pushed this forward for me. So and again, the writer director Jane Schoenbrunn, they're non-binary themselves. So I think that they bring a distinct perspective to the story. By using this sleepaway camp setting. to explore gender, to explore sexuality, and a little bit about female empowerment as well. So I think that, you know, that sexual identity feels baked into the movie's, you know, understanding of like what queer identity is and performance, and, you know, the complicated relationships between how we see ourselves and how others see ourselves, which kind of feels like the movie that we're going to talk about in the third act of this podcast as I'm talking about it, right? So I wasn't a big fan of I Saw the TV Glow either, although I think you and I were in the minority. I think a lot of people love that film. But for this one, Sean Brun had me completely on board from the beginning. So there's something like brilliantly horny about this movie too. I don't know if I can say it like that, but it understands that, you know, sex and horror have always been natural partners, right? But it approaches it in a way that, you know, it approaches it in a way that doesn't simply recycle, you know, the old sex versus death in a horror movie's formula. So I think the Hannah Einbinder, right? Hannah Einbinder, Gillian Anderson. I think their dynamic is great. There's like an emotional and erotic perspective that separates them from everything else that we've seen before. And then you've already talked about the gore, but that scene, like that massacre scene, is amazing. Like I said, one of the most creative things I've seen in a slasher movie in a very, very long time. So if you're into slasher movies, I don't know, it's going to be hard. What do you think? Do you think the traditional slasher the traditional slasher horror hound fan is going to embrace something like this? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think hopefully, because I think, like you said, I mean, I think you make a good point in terms of like sex and horror have always had this intersection with one another, and this is sort of like the most explicit, direct exploration of that I can remember seeing. So I think you have to go in with the expectation that this is not a traditional slasher, and like, you know, the kill count or whatever is sort of like, it's very sort of like I guess like it's distributed in a very thoughtful way where it's not like a nonstop bloodbath, but I think you get what you're looking for out of the experience. And then I think it's also more of like an exploration about like horror movies themselves as well, and like commentaries on horror movies and stuff like that. So
definitely in the third act. Yeah. Some of these decisions that the director makes are these really big swings, and, you know, they occasionally miss, but I'd rather see a slasher like this swing really big and miss than, you know, play it safe for 90 minutes. So that's what I found myself really enjoying.
Yeah. Well, all right. We'll get into final thoughts and grades. And yeah, this is just a really unique film. I mean, I think, and you mentioned a little bit of, I kind of talked about them separately, but there is a genuine, like, really great chemistry between Hannah Einbinder and Gillian Anderson within the movie itself that really kind of makes the movie work. It is like expertly crafted by Jane Schoenbrunn. I mean, just so well directed. You know, you are, you know, this is the type of like style in filmmaking that I wish more horror had, right? Like, there's a lot that's explored here. There's a lot of creativity within the way that things, like, it just has a very specific look to it that I feel feels like it sets itself apart. Its exploration on sex, I think, is really interesting, and like I said, I fully reserve the right to be wrong about my take on it, but I feel like maybe the messaging of the movie does not come across the way in a way that I think it's intended, at least for my read of things, or there's maybe like a little bit of like an interpretation of the movie that leans into like some unhealthy things. But that being said, it's so well executed, well done. The movie within a movie element is great.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the actual film that they're thinking about. The actual film that they're basing it off of the original is shown in the actual film.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah. So like the source material that they're basing off of is created in there. And I think that's a great like little parody of like, you know, corny 80s slashers. And
yeah, but this wasn't corny. The actual original one, that was pretty interesting too. I was like, wow, this is way better than any Friday the 13th movie I've seen. So
yeah, and also it's an opportunity for Schoenbrunn to again talk about like the problematic nature of like '80s horror movies, right? And sort of part of why they want to reboot Camp Miasma is because it's seen as a very problematic franchise because it's like transphobic and like they explain the origin of that. And I thought that's like a really well done detail. So just really well constructed film. Doesn't quite get to the point where, I think it's, one of the best movies of the year or anything, but it's really, really solid. I'm, like the previous movie, I'm giving this one a B. Kiko, your thoughts and grade.
Yeah, I'll admit that somebody like Ben Shapiro, of course, is going to come out and say that this is the most woke slasher movie ever made. But it's probably why it's such a good movie. I don't know if traditional slasher fans are going to buy in, but I thought it was provocative and playful, and I thought it was like the sort of midnight movie you would see it like at South by Southwest, but one that feels like really irreplaceable. This is not like anything I've seen before when it comes to slasher movies. So I'm giving this a solid B as well.
All right. And then we will move to our final film of the week, We Are Pat. So We Are Pat is a documentary that is directed by Rowan Haber. And it's a documentary that explores the SNL character Pat from the 1990s and subject of the movie It's Pat. Basically exploring that character, that sketch, this type of comedy through the modern lens of gender. And, so for anyone who doesn't know or doesn't remember, this sketch was a character played by Julia Sweeney, who basically was like an androgynous character who you couldn't really tell if Pat was male or female. And basically the entire sketch was built around people trying to figure out whether or not Pat was male or female. And that was the extent of the entire sketch. And then Pat was just sort of like indifferent towards ever revealing that information. And so the film features interviews mostly with trans and non-binary comedians who discuss a wide ranging of topics, including the character and sketch of Pat itself, looking at comedy through a modern lens and looking at Pat through a modern lens, and ultimately trying to reimagine what Pat might look like in the modern age, trying to kind of like rewrite these sketches using humor to kind of like reclaim Pat as sort of like a non-binary icon, right? And that's kind of like the idea. So, this film I think is like really earnestly made, and I think it has like some moments of some really interesting explorations of topics where, when you start to look at the character of Pat in this sketch, it was happening before like non-binary identity was something that was like really like understood or there was a name for it.
Yeah, even. I don't think that term was even being used.
Yeah, not really. And so there's a lot of interesting conversations about like, well, was this kind of like ahead of its time, or was it offensive, or was it kind of both, right? And right. And I think what the film ultimately lands on is like it's complex. There's some interviews with the comedian River Butcher that sort of expresses like this can be both like funny and offensive and whatever at the same time. And I find it interesting. Like I kind of go back and forth on whether I find like really serious in-depth conversations about comedy interesting, because sometimes it can like really get it starts to like I start to lose a little bit of interest the more deeper that you dive into what makes something funny or not. Like I think it's like it maybe stops.
If you have to explain your joke kind of thing.
Sort of, but also, a lot of it can be like really in-depth conversations on like a lot of what you hear in this movie from the people who worked on SNL was just like, we were just trying to come up with something funny. And then you start to like explore it deeper, and it starts to like be explored a little bit more than it's like meant to, I think, in certain cases. But I do think that there is something particularly interesting on comedy that doesn't hold up, right? And comedy that maybe once upon a time was completely acceptable, but the culture the viewpoints, what we know about gender, in this case, shifts and evolves over time to where it might, in modern, with a modern lens, look super offensive. And I think you get, when you speak to some of these like gender diverse and trans comedians, get to hear a little bit more about their experience with the character of Pat and their discomfort with the character of Pat, because they were either, made fun of because of their, gender when they were younger, or maybe it forced them to, look within themselves and confront, pieces about themselves that they didn't quite understand, or, the idea that like the fact that their gender was unclear and that was the butt of the joke was like, a painful experience. So I think that there are areas in which sometimes this works and doesn't work. I think that the movie like works as well as it does, and maybe wouldn't work at all without the involvement of Julia Sweeney, who I think bringing her into the mix, I think really elevates the experience quite a bit. And I think it's because, so often when comedians are like asked about like offensive material that maybe didn't hold up over time.
Hank Azaria.
Yeah, you just sort of hear like, oh, well, it was a different time. And that's the most they ever say, right? They're not willing to explore or take accountability or, talk about it in any really meaningful way. And I think Julia Sweeney is willing to talk about this. Yeah. And she's not only willing to talk about this, but willing to confront the impact that it may have had on people and the way that it may have made people feel, while also not necessarily like apologizing for it.
Right. Yeah.
Which she's like, she's expressing where she's coming from. And I think this works both ways in that she doesn't just try to explain it away like it's a different time. She tries to explain where she's coming from, understand the impact that it had without necessarily apologizing. And then the trans and non-binary comedians also don't like put her on trial for this either. They are willing to listen and understand the intent behind the character while also expressing their point of view, and they make an effort to try to understand her and where she's coming from. And I think that's such an interesting kind of like back and forth dialogue that they have of the exploration of like comedy that, ages like milk or whatever, right? like this type of stuff. And I really appreciate the openness of Julia Sweeney as, she's basically put under the microscope for a lot of this movie and doesn't shy away from any of it. And I think it's a really like admirable thing to kind of be the subject of like a very critical movie like this and be open to hearing everything.
And you have to realize too, I was reading that this movie took 5 years to make, and you see at the beginning when the director's initial email to Julia Sweeney, and you think, okay, it's going to be like one of those one interview type things that's going to be edited into the movie, but you see her like maybe in 2 or 3 different interviews, so you can tell that she's invested in this for the whole 5 years, which I thought was amazing. She could have just been like, okay, I don't know where this is going.
I'll give you 30 minutes of my time. And
yeah. I don't know what y'all are doing now. Now you've changed. You kind of turned on a dime here, and now you're going this way. And she seemed like she was totally on board. So
yeah, and I think that there's great sort of conversations here about like hearing again like non-binary, trans, queer comedians talk about like queer comedy and like their perspective and how it's used as a form of resistance against people who are hateful and who are afraid or whatever it might be. Talk about their experiences performing comedy, their perspectives on the character. But then I feel like a lot of these types of movies like maybe try to stretch things a little bit, where I think sometimes either the premise runs a little bit thin, or it's too overstuffed and they try to cover too much, like it's too ambitious in a way. The thing that's like least interesting to me, I think you may disagree on this, but like the whole concept of like, can we make Pat funny now in writing modern sketches? That really didn't do anything for me. I don't think that that's super successful within the movie. I do think it's interesting to see these different comedians like put on the costume and play the role or whatever, but that to me, sort of like the dissection of how we can make it modern, is the least interesting part of the documentary, in my opinion. I'm much more interested in the exploration of of the comedy itself, the exploration of what do we do with material that hasn't aged well, the exploration even of like I said, was Pat something that was like unintentionally or maybe partially intentionally way ahead of its time in the way that it treated gender? And I think that is a really interesting topic of conversation. So I would say this movie is super interesting, like 2/3 of the time or 3/4 or something like that. And then like a quarter of it, I just was not as interested or invested in. And I think it's a little bit less successful. And then also I think sometimes it goes a little bit too in depth into sort of like, again, having academic conversations about comedy itself. But anything that's coming from like the gender perspective, I think is pretty interesting. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get your thoughts.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit on the last part that you said, but I think that part of it, trying to, getting these trans and non-binary comedians and artists to inhabit the character, I think it's just them asking, what happens when Pat, this character, is taken out of the original SNL content and allowed to like kind of exist on their own terms. So, right, I think those sections were fascinating because they turn Pat into like, they turn them from a TV character into a real character that almost can be like, they're trying to like reclaim this character if
right.
that makes sense. So I thought I wanted more of that. I think maybe it didn't hit, it could not hit as well for you and maybe other viewers because they don't really arrive to an answer about who that Pat could be in 2026. So like, what would Pat look like now? What would that character even work? Could Pat be something entirely different? They don't really answer that question. And so there's no moment of clarity. And so maybe that was the point of it perhaps. But I kind of still found myself wishing that, the film had pushed that question even further and maybe got to like a place where everybody not maybe agreed 100%, but kind of found, something to agree on, which they did. I mean, it's interesting because all the comedians, they're like Julia Sweeney. They were like, well, we love this character and we hate this character, Right. So I really think that was really a very intriguing reactions to all of them. And back to Julia Sweeney's participation in this, I loved watching, her wrestle with the realization of what she had done, what she had created, right? Mm-hmm. I think she, in those scenes, she appeared genuinely affected by what she hears. She doesn't simply abandon the character or apologize for it. Mm-hmm. She instead tries to understand what Pat could mean to, why it could mean something so different to different people. And I think that makes her participation feel really valuable to a film like this, and very, very different than a lot of documentaries that would go to a place like this. So the people don't try to condemn her, these comedians, which was really interesting to me. So I think of a character like Speedy Gonzalez. I know that's race and we're talking about gender, but as a Mexican American who grew up watching Looney Tunes, I have similarly complicated feelings about a character like that. I love Speedy, but at the same time it's a rat. It's kind of funny. It's like, oh, but he's the fastest rat. But I'm like, oh, but he's still a rat. So I love that character, but at the same time you can say if there's problems with it and there's problematic characters, but it doesn't mean you have to completely denounce them. So I just I thought it was an interesting, I think I give the director credit for sticking with a project like this and allowing it to develop. It's clear that a film like this, they're trying to really understand the subject that they're tackling rather than simply tell us what to think about it. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that like sometimes with these documentaries that cover political or social issues, that there's an agenda behind, like we want you to think this way about this kind of thing. And I think the idea that doesn't have answers actually speaks to the complexity of the issue, and the idea that, they're not saying that Pat is good or bad or offensive or not offensive. You get a variety of different opinions from different people, including the people who created it, which I think it's a far less interesting documentary without the input of like the people who created it, which I think that's why I think Sweeney's involvement is such a nice like gift for the film.
Right. Yeah. And I'm also glad they didn't have a bunch of counselors dissecting this either.
Yeah. Well, that's all I'll say for now. We'll get into final thoughts and grades, and yeah, it's a solid little doc. I mean, I think that it really has some interesting conversations about the intersection of gender and comedy and gender identity and comedy, and again, like I said, that one of the more interesting explorations that you can have is just sort of like the evolution of society and how that can make certain types of comedy, you know, seem super offensive, and what do you do to reconcile that, right? Like, how do you, like, do you hold people accountable or not? Do you let them off the hook because it was a different time? Can you look at it through a different lens to where like maybe it had a different intended effect, or maybe it's deeper than you thought it was. Maybe it seems like a caricature and maybe there's something more to it. And I think those are all really interesting explorations and conversations that are had within the movie, especially with the inclusion of having comedians actually talk about, you know, their experiences with it. A little bit less successful, maybe a little bit overly ambitious in parts, but still solid enough to recommend. I'm giving this a B-.
Great, yeah, and I think the film, I thought it was most compelling when, you know, it refuses to spoon feed us the answers, and instead it allows us to ask more interesting questions like, you know, can a character be harmful and meaningful at the same time? Can someone find comfort in a character while others finding it insulting? And so with Julia Sweeney's participation, I think it really gets to the heart of the matter, and so I am giving this a solid B.
All right. So that's going to do it for this week. So next week is crazy. There are a ton of movies opening next week, and I don't know quite yet what we're going to cover exactly, but it's going to be some combination of the Dog Stars, which is Ridley Scott's new movie, Coyote versus Acme, the long-awaited, previously shelved animation live-action hybrid. We have Buddy, the new film from the Too Many Cooks creator, Finding Emily, Idiots, It Ends, Colony. I mean, I think that's like 7 movies or something like that. So we'll cover some portion of these. I don't know how many, but you can expect to see at least 4 or 5 of these, because I think we've already seen
more than half. Yeah.
More than half. Yeah, so Kiko, why don't you tell the folks listening and watching about the content that you have on our YouTube channel and on our website this week?
Yeah, if you go to CineSnob.net or our YouTube channel, this week I have some really interesting interviews. I got a chance to interview, we're talking about We Are Pat. I got a chance to interview former Saturday Night Live comedian Julia Sweeney about her documentary, and also interviewed the film's director, Rowan Haber. So check that out. And also, did you know that a new Attack of the Killer Tomatoes sequel just hit streaming? Well, if you didn't, I got a chance to jump on a Zoom call with the lead actress of that movie, Myrna Velasco, to talk about the film and her career, which includes a lot of voice credits like Star Wars Resistance and DC Superhero Girls. So she's big in the industry of the voice. So make sure to check that one out. All that and more at CineSnob.net and our YouTube channel.
Awesome. And again, if you are new to the show, you're listening for the first time, one thing that we always ask for, if you can and have some time, is to like and subscribe to our YouTube, like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you see us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe there. And also, if you can leave us a 5-star review, we would greatly appreciate it. And then again, check our website. Again, you can find all of these interviews. You can find all of our past reviews clipped into their own separate videos. You don't have to watch full episodes to get reviews for whatever movie you want to check out. You can check out these individual clips. I think that's going to do it. So we'll have a packed show next week. But for this week, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the CineSnob Podcast. To read reviews, interviews, and more, visit CineSnob.net. See you next week.